Some people think little girls should be seen and not heard, but I think, oh, bondage, up yours!
Thus spake Polystyrene of punk band X-Ray Specs in 1977.
1, 2, 3, 4!
This perfect rallying call for the rebellious DIY punk generation was in direct opposition to the slick, macho posturing of early 70s rock music. Punk was the first youth movement that accepted women as equals, freed young girls to explore their own idea of themselves in music, fashion and art. Suddenly, it was woman as musical protagonist, not as passive muse. By 1979, I was lucky enough to have benefited from this female vanguard as punk metamorphosed into the broader musical spectrum new wave. As Pauline Black, lead singer of The Selector, I was part of the post-punk two-tone movement, forming a band with 6 other guys which fought the twin evils of racism and sexism through its music.
Down in the streets, he said he loved me, but he loved the beach.
In 1980, I was asked to be part of a photo shoot for the cover of New Musical News, a short-lived rival to the more famous NME, that brought me together with Chrissie Hynde of The Pretenders, Viv Albertine of The Slits, Susie Sue of The Banshees, Polystyrene of X-Ray Specs, and Debbie Harry of Blondie. Traditionally, male editors of music journals thought that a cover shot of a lone female artist wouldn't sell enough of their papers, so they tended to do a roundup of prominent female musicians of the day and put them on the cover bearing a catch-all "Women in Rock" slogan. Conceptually, this shoot was for much the same cynical purpose, except the resultant cover shot is now an iconic photo depicting several early freedom fighters who established new rules of engagement for the ongoing war against that bastion of male hegemony, the music industry. I've got the iconic photo here, and there's a back row, a grouping, and in the back row is Chrissie Hynde wearing a leather jacket, clutching a glass of red wine, and well, I was in awe of her because she sang, wrote songs, played guitar and fronted a band as though her life depended on it. She was like the bona fide musician. Next to her is the glorious blonde Ms. Debbie Harry of Blondie, and a grinning Viv Albertine next to her too from The Slits. And Susie Sue is off to one side. She looks as though she's drinking orange juice, and not at all the kind of fearsome persona that she's got when she's on stage. And sitting on the couch in the front is a very demure-looking Polystyrene, and myself probably wondering what on earth we were doing there.
Yeah, it was in a hotel, and it was in Knightsbridge. I remember sort of just being ushered into a room and speaking to Debbie Harry and Chrissie Hynde.
Why had we been chosen? What did we symbolise in this post-punk, post-contraceptive pill, post-legalised abortion, post-equal opportunities world of music? This is what Susie of the Banshees has to say.
At the time when the Banshees started, there was a lot of guy bands. There were some women getting involved in making music. It's probably the most positive time for women to make music. But there weren't that many leaders of male bands around. And I think when punk came along, it was the first time that it was acceptable and encouraged by contemporaries then that women could be assertive and aggressive even. And I think that was probably the most aggressive women were perceived as, was around that time. Well, it's called aggression, but I just think it was a high time that something different was done and another voice was heard.
Viv Albertine of The Slits has similar ideas.
The Slits changed the world, mainly for girls, I would think, that we, for the first time, I think from watching us, you felt, yeah, I can go out there and I can be the girl I am. I don't have to pretend to be girly. I don't have to pretend to be feminine or what's considered, the archetypal feminine role model. I don't have to cook and bake. I don't even have to try and look pretty. I can smear black coal all around my eyes. I can wear Dr. Martens and I can walk with real attitude. I can go out there and I can make music, which is completely, from people who are untaught. I can be brave. I can stand on stage. I can shout about what's really happening in my my life, and people take it seriously and people are interested. And I don't think anyone really did that before.
Until those days, white female musicians had 3 acceptable stereotypes: vulnerable, kooky or sexy. For black women there were 2, sexy and tragic. Sex sells records, so women musicians were singled out for media attention in bands, which often irritated some male band members. This is how Gay Advert, former bassist with the Adverts and remembered by many a prepubescent male as the first punk pin-up, dealt with it.
It really irritated me, actually, because, you just feel singled out for being female. I think it still happens these days, actually, but in those days it was even worse. So it's like some kind of novelty.
In those days, I mean, if you were a female in a band, you did tend to get singled out. Did that happen immediately, or was it something that kind of crept up on you and you didn't realise?
Not immediately, but as soon as things started happening, people would just want to talk to you because you were a female and things, and I just really hated that, and it did cause friction in the band because, for example, the drummer didn't like me getting more attention than him, and I didn't like it either, but it's still, I couldn't do anything about it, really.
When you say that caused tensions, I mean, how did that manifest itself?
Well, he just used to get angry about it.
To you or to the others?
To me, really.
No. Because, I know, in our band, there were 6 guys and me, and they would never actually say anything to me, but I know that they used to grumble about it between themselves, so I just wondered how it was for other women.
Also, when our first single came out, it was just a picture of me on the cover, which none of us were expecting.
So did you feel exploited in that way? Or?
Kind of, yeah. I mean, obviously I never used to dress in a sort of female way, so it's just sort of that pixelated picture of my face. And I did go on to be quite a famous picture, but I just remember my horror at the time.
Looking through Gary Gilmore's eyes. Looking through Gary Gilmore's eyes.
I had foreseen that problem when I joined the Selector. My answer was to forego any typically sexy image and dress like a Jamaican rude boy, in a tonic suit, Ben Sherman shirt, trilby hat and loafers. I subverted this masculine image by wearing makeup. Polystyrene chose her own more eclectic route.
Well, I was wearing braces at the time, and I felt I couldn't be really girly or very sexy with the braces on, and also, it's a young look to wear those kind of train track braces. So I didn't want to have a very sort of overtly sexy image. I also remember wearing Sophie's dresses that were like tube-like, so they gave you like an androgynous look because they didn't show any of your shape, and then just wearing leggings underneath and leotards, and then putting on an army helmet and goggles and having short hair and not wearing very much makeup. I also didn't want people to sort of shout out, "Get them off," because I'd quite a curvaceous figure, and the guys were just shouting, "Get them off," and I thought I never want that to happen to me, so I purposely tried not to have a sexy look.
Yeah, it's strange that you say that, because when I went into the Selector, I very much felt that if you were a woman and you were going to be judged, I suppose, in some ways as to the merits of your music or what you were trying to say, then it seemed better not to go for that overtly sexy kind of look. But you can go too far the other way, or maybe I did, because I ended up sort of dressing like a boy. We both share mixed race heritage or whatever. Do you feel that maybe we'd taken other things on board that got us there? I mean, I know I did. I was just wondering whether it was the same for you.
I didn't really think very much about being mixed race at the time. I was definitely conscious about having a feminine-shaped body, a womanly body, and I think I just wanted to hide that up as much as I could, because I also felt that I wouldn't be respected as a female songwriter if people say, well, she's just successful because she's got big boobs. I think I tried to hide that and let people focus on the fact that I'd written these songs and that I could write songs and lyrics, and that I was singing with quite a powerful voice. And, maybe I was competing with boys a bit, really, subconsciously.
I most definitely competed with the boys. I wanted to be as aggressive and assertive as they were allowed to be. But none of us sprang fully formed into this brave new world. We'd grown up in a different era, the 60s. What womanly archetypes had we been influenced by? Susie of the Banshees went back to another era altogether to develop her edgy look.
There were many influences to do with glam rock, and I think that was blurring the stereotypes. I was very drawn to the sort of 20s and 30s, first time women cut their hair short, And there's that glossy black hair, big black eyes and dark lips.
She tries not to shatter, kaleidoscope style. Personality changes behind her and smile. Every problem brings a stranger inside. Hopelessly forcing on morning disguise. Christine, the strawberry girl, Christine.
For me, it's more the films of that era with like Louise Brooks. And when you think about it, it's probably the most liberating time for women and very much, I don't know, a blueprint for, I mean, it influenced parts of the 60s. If you look at Mary Quant and Vidal Sassoon with all those cuts, and the film Cabaret is definitely taken from that 20s, 30s sort of freedom and decadence, and almost like a brave new world, because everything must have seemed really new then. It was unique. It was the first time women were outside their constraints of corsets and having their hair, totally ironed into curls or, ringlets or whatever. And they'd had the vote for not very long, so you get a real sense that it must have felt amazingly liberating. And so that kind of atmosphere around then I've always been really drawn to and slightly envious of as well.
Viv Albertine chose a 60s icon.
The only other female figure, apart from Vivienne Westwood, who was a role model for me, was Yoko Ono, who I had been utterly smitten with from the minute she came into my consciousness by teaming up with John Lennon. I loved John Lennon before he met Yoko Ono, and I was so pleased that he'd chosen someone, even though I was so very young, that he'd chosen somebody who wasn't a bimbo, someone interesting, someone who I learnt from. I read her poetry and her thoughts on life and how she presented herself and how she was a whole character. She was an utter influence on me as well, right from the age of about 8 or 9 years old. I wasn't really influenced by, say, Janis Joplin or Grace Slick, people who went before, because, A, they had too much talent and I couldn't even conceive of myself being in their league. So what I was doing was something totally different to what they were doing, because they were proper musicians with great voices, and what I was doing was expressing myself in a very raw way. So that's why Yoko Ono was a great influence on me, because she was someone who was just utterly individual, expressing herself. And apart from her, the only other person who came along was Patti Smith, who was so open and so raw and so passionate and so sexual in a way that's, to me, no other female artist had been.
Since Polly and I were mixed race, we were influenced by a different palette and shared some of the same tastes, with Polly also taking inspiration from the early environmentalism and anti-consumerism espoused by Joni Mitchell and her ilk.
I liked African-American music, mainly Tina, Aretha Franklin. I actually liked the Supremes as well, even though they were much more girly. And then I did also like people like Grace Slick and Janis Joplin. Yeah, and even Joni Mitchell. I liked some of her songs, the ones about the environment, Big Yellow Taxi. I liked a lot of different female artists. In fact, I probably liked them better than I liked the male artists.
I grew up with Motown, Atlantic, a lot of R&B. Aretha Franklin, Respect, and Stevie Wonder, really early on, along with the likes of, Shirley Bassey, and also along with that my love of soundtrack music to films by the likes of Bernard Herrmann for Hitchcock. So I always like to have something with a bit of an edge.
Singing and playing guitar was one thing, but the women who ventured further into male territory on drums or bass were few and further between. As one of the few female bassists of the time, Gay Advert suffered a constant debate in the rock press about her playing prowess.
Well, in reviews and things, they would sort of single out, and, there was definitely more attention paid to my playing, and some people said I couldn't, and some people said I was fine and, as good as anybody else, and it was just like continual debate. Just kind of kept out of it.
Did that bother you?
Yeah, it was irritating, but couldn't do anything about it, really.
But that wasn't meted out to men quite so much.
No.
Would you say that?
No, not at all.
Why do you think it is to women?
Just because, you're still regarded as something of a novelty, really.
The second wave of the feminist movement had moved the agenda forward for women in society. Us women of the new wave were the first to benefit from their radical approach, whether we admitted it or not. Polystyrene again.
I was aware of women's liberation, but only really through the tabloid press, of sort of burning your bra and that sort of thing.
1, 2, 3, 4!
I didn't really know exactly what they were talking about that much. I mean, I learned a little bit of history about the suffragettes and sort of equal rights for women, but women's liberation, I didn't really fully understand it. I was a bit young to really grasp it. I suppose why they like that song is because of the little bit at the front. Some people think little girls should be seen and not heard, but I think, oh, bondage up yours. So I suppose that is a sort of a call for girls or women that feel that they want to have a voice and they want to be heard and that they have every right to be here as much as their male counterparts.
Viv Albertine again.
Feminism was bubbling away and happening, and it was happening in, intellectual circles very much, especially in film theory. But there was no conscious transferring of feminism into our words or into our actions. We just actually jumped that whole bridge and went straight to being who we were. And we got a lot of stick for it, we got a lot of violence from it, and we got a lot of being ignored by the industry from it. We were like a girl gang. We were like something out of a movie. We'd walk four across. We'd stride down the street. We all had sort of funky clothes on. We'd be dressed half fetish wear, but then also have Dr. Martin boots or loads of black makeup around our eyes and some messy matted hair. And we were giving off very cross signals to these very, very straight people. There was nothing like us. Men would be half turned on, half freaked out, half, sort of scared by us. And we would often get not only verbal abuse, but Ari's been stabbed a couple of times when we were together. We've been chased, we've been hit, because they didn't actually see us as females even. We were just these weird creatures from another planet. So we would be punched, hit, chased, threatened, I think through fear. There was a cross between sexual clothing, fetish clothing, with an aggressive sort of, you come near me and I'll give you trouble sort of look in our eyes, because they were used to looking at girls in these sort of fetishish clothes, but who had a sort of come on look in their eyes, and they were utterly freaked out. I mean, we would get spat at in the street. It was fear. Like all aggressive reaction is fear and lack of understanding.
The shared menstrual experience of the all-girl band was definitely not for me. In those days, girl bands were easily marginalised and dismissed by a male chauvinist music industry. But if a new breed of woman was challenging that bastion of maleness by getting up on stage and singing about politics and the darker sides of life, there were also those who revelled in subverting stereotypes. After all, punk rock itself had set out to provoke.
Chrissie Hynde, I remember meeting her for the first time at the beginning of 1976, and the first thing she said to me, "I'm going to be your new singer." And there was starting to be girls in bands.
Former punk pin-up and bad boy Jean-Jacques Bonnel of the Stranglers recalls being vilified by women's groups over the band's lyrics, with surprising results.
We were accused of being sexist, fascist, every ist in the book, because the new orthodoxy dictated that certain things should be adhered to. The first track on our first album, the first line was, "Sometimes I'm going to smack your face," and it was about a bloke hitting a girl. And then another song on that same album was about blokes leering at girls on beaches, a song called Peaches. And that, for some reason, put us on the wrong side of the my first encounter with political correctness, actually. Rough Trade wouldn't stock our records because they accused us of being sexist. And in fact, I considered ourselves to be more journalistic than sexist or fascist. We were just recounting certain incidents. We weren't advocating these things.
Strolling along, minding my own business. Well, there goes a girl and a half. She's got me going up and down.
I know you had a bit of trouble and things with women from, that whole kind of post-feminist...
Well, yeah, and it built up some kind of momentum, actually, because in 1979 we went to Australia for the first time, and we were harangued by women's groups and attacked by placard-wielding women's groups, and quite a lot of having to get into venues via secret back doors just because they'd had it in their heads that we mistreated women. And of course it was helped by the fact that in 1978 we played a concert at Battersea Park, and there were 5 girls who stripped on stage. And the whole point of that had originally been that one of the girls, who was a stripper, she made a living from that, and she thought that all these accusations against us were so bad that she wanted to show with some colleagues of hers, and in fact 1 or 2 of the girls weren't even strippers, that they just wanted to show that they were empowered and they could, call the tune vis-a-vis guys. So they stripped on the stage, and of course the whole thing was turned around by the media.
So what you're basically saying then is the Stranglers were deeply misunderstood.
Well, we were, yes, we were, completely.
Okay.
And that we were exploiting women. In fact, it was the other way around. But
do you think that women were exploiting you?
No, I think they were defending us, actually. I think in that Battersea Park case, the girls who volunteered to go, we didn't hire them, who volunteered to strip during a particular song, wanted to show their support for us and say that the rest of it was, load of...
But even though we had mostly thrown off the sexist chains in performance, what happened after the shows for women? In my experience, as soon as the hotel door shut, loneliness prevailed. In this respect, it certainly was different for girls. As Polystyrene says, it was not done to mix the music business and pleasure in those days.
I did see a lot of girls. I had some school friends or girls that I knew when I was really young that were just like groupies, and mind you, they never ever got really very far in the music business. I took the best route, just have a band and certainly don't sleep with any of them, and just write songs and play music and try and be, I suppose I was just trying to be like one of the boys, really.
Touring back then, how did you find it? Because I used to find it desperately lonely sometimes on tour, if there weren't any other women around. But Susie Sue says the same thing, that she found it very lonely because it's like all the boys go off and have a really great time and get drunk and do all the kind of carousing and stuff like that. Whereas, like you said, you can't sleep with anyone in the band because it's all business. So I was just wondering what it was like. How did you find that?
I didn't really find it that lonely. But I know what you mean about the guys just going off and getting wasted and pulling lots of girls, and you can't really do that. So you're a bit like an outsider. You feel like an outsider in your own band.
Do you think that has changed? That women aren't seen in quite that same way now, that you couldn't possibly
go and get wasted
and sleep with loads of men?
Well, I think things have changed a lot. Girls do. Not that I particularly would really want to, but girls, it is much more liberal now, It's not such a double standard. But at the time, I think there was a really double standard, It's like all the guys go around and lay all these girls, but they want to marry a virgin.
Like myself, I doubt whether the initial impulse of most women musicians who formed bands was to pull members of the audience and brag about our sexual conquests. So what was our motivation? Over 30 years on, women have arguably won many of the battles their mothers and grandmothers had to fight. Female musicians proliferate as they have never done before, and it's not just 20-somethings who are feeling this new empowerment. Do you think that what happened back then, say with the people who were in that room on that day, in that photo session, do you think that whatever we represented back then, or the things that we were trying to say and your part in it, do you think that that's left a legacy for young women today to feel more empowered?
Well, I hope so. I mean, it depends what you mean by being empowered. If it means that you can go and get good grades at school and you have good work prospects and you're intelligent and you're very much equal to men, it has helped people. I mean, I know I still get a lot of emails from my website, the X-Ray Specs website, from young girls that want to interview me, and they're writing their school projects at university and they want to interview me about being a girl in punk. And so I suppose in that way it is influencing still and having an impact and helping people, young women, maybe feel more confident and maybe that's the word, really making them more confident to feel that they can achieve their goals.
It is wonderful to think that women have benefited from what we did. But Viv Albertine thinks her job is not yet done and that her countrywomen still need her.
30 years on from the Slits, it's almost a huge chasm. That's the reason I'm back, because actually I think my country needs me. It's like the planets have lined up again and said, come on, get back out there and let's talk about being real again. Let's, get rid of all this trying to be a star, trying to be rich, and just let's women talk about who they are and girls talk about who they are again. In fact, musically, I don't know if there's anyone really doing it. You've had the Riot Girls and Courtney Love from Hole, and Lily Allen's a great lyricist and she writes in that vein. But actually, I feel more akin with Tracy Emin and Sarah Lucas than I do with actually musicians nowadays. I think those girls are going out there and telling it like it is.
I think that just having seen the way that myself, you, Chrissie Hynde, the Slits, how we presented ourselves on stage. It didn't even get as far sometimes, I suppose, as to even what we were saying. But that was a fairly unique way of presenting yourself at that time. It was certainly very, very different. And I feel as though maybe women who are around now and identify with us from back then, it's that they take. I guess it's self-confidence just to be oneself rather than anything else.
Yeah, and able to just know that you can go out there and you have an equal chance with the guys. I think that's quite important, and I know my daughter, she'd like to be Prime Minister if she could. She feels that these things are within her grasp and she probably won't achieve that, but it's still that there's some sort of confidence there that she can do things. I think that's quite a good thing to have influenced.
Women's rights have only been on the agenda for about 150 years. To my knowledge, no man had to fight for such fundamental recognition in the last century. If women were able to work the factories and the land during the last World War, then coming up with a 3-chord riff and forming a band was hardly a stretch. But us ladies of the new wave have knitted our musical stories into the giant patchwork quilt of the history of women. Female musicians have all benefited from each other, from the grand dames like Shirley Bassey, Marianne Faithfull and Tina Turner, to the many young women in today's vanguard like Beyoncé, Lily Allen, Amy Winehouse and Vivi Brown. Long may we knit one and pearl one in peace.